What's the most fked up thing you saw at a sleepover? My friend's elder brother would get mad at her for small things. Went in his room, lost the TV remote, shut a door too loudly, and proceed to beat the shit out of her. Pull her hair and hold her down and punch her in the sides. Literally throw her across the room. He was almost 10 years older than us and easily had 150 pounds on her. He would eventually tire from the beatings, leave the room, and she would go back to playing with me like nothing happened. I remember being so unbelievably shocked by it, but eventually became desensitized because of how normal it seemed to her, and how unfazed she was by it. Not really freaked up, but I was terrified. One night I slept over at my friend's house. I wake up in the middle of the night, because I felt sick. However, my friend wasn't in his bed and both clocks were broken and stuck at some random time like 1:38 AM or something. I was convinced that time had frozen and everyone disappeared. I remember crying and being too scared to go downstairs to check the microwave clock. Eventually I went into his parents' room and woke up his parents. My friend was sleeping in his parents' bed too. LOL. One time I was at a friend's house for a sleepover and he and another friend held me down on the couch and tried to light my hair on fire with lighters. I managed to break free and ran upstairs and asked my friend's mum to let me use the phone. Mum came promptly to pick me up. Needless to say, I was not on speaking terms with the other two again. When I was in the 6th grade I was going to stay the night at a friend's house, but we ended up at another kid's down the street. This guy ended up talking about how he would hump his bed until there was a wet spot on his boxers. He ended up doing this while we were in the room watching TV and then showed us the wet spot. And that was how I learned how to jerk off. I remember we did a secondary school bonding thing in our first year where you effectively go to a summer camp for the weekend with the whole year group, about 211 12-year-olds, to get to know everyone. Sleeping arrangements were in dormitories with bunk beds, separated by gender, about 30 to a room. Lights go out in my dorm. No teachers, just 30 11 12-year-olds that don't know each other that well. A kid farts. Hilarious. Someone else farts. A few others. Then, I vividly remember a distinct sloppy sound followed by a panicked "oh." A kid shat himself. I would also like to note, this was not the only public pants shooting by this kid. He did it again final year during our Duke of Edinburgh Award expedition overnight. Whilst camping, I was sharing a tent with him. That's a whole different story. We were playing hide and seek with my friend's little sister and I went into the unlocked bathroom while loudly saying, "Where could she be? Maya been here?" The little sister was 5, we were 10, and the father was jackhammering his dong while staring at himself in the bathroom mirror and had his other hand tweaking his nipple. I left and walked home. Kid who had a pee jar in his closet. It was a gallon pickle jar. If he had to pee in the middle of the night he had to use the jar. Once his mum put him, us, in his room for the night, we weren't allowed to leave his room until she came to get us the next morning. How did they make sure of that? The doorknob was turned around backwards so they could lock us in. Holy shoot, my inbox. Okay. The jar was for emergency use only and was emptied and washed in the morning if he used it. Probably rarely used it since most kids that age can hold it all night. He was a bad kid and stayed in trouble. Pretty sure the lock thing was to send him to his room and make sure he stayed there. Don't know about the parents' shrexual habits, but I'm not surprised that most of Reddit immediately jumped on the drug-fueled orgies responses. When I was around 13-14, a kid I invited over to my sleepover birthday party decided to trip down to his tighty whities right before cake and ice cream. Myself, my parents, friends and relatives were mortified. Apparently it was normal behavior at his house. I had a friend whose dad had a fish tank of piranha. I really wanted to feed them a hot dog, but her dad told me they already ate. During the night I snuck down to where the fish tank was and there was picked clean fish bones in the tank. The dad was down there watching football and he spotted me and asked if I still wanted to feed the piranha. Being a small piranha-obsessed child, I nodded and produced the hot dog I saved from the barbecue dinner we had. It was the most terrifying and awesome thing I have ever saw. 10 out of 10 would never want to watch 3 piranha go at a hot dog ever again. Least not in person. When I was like 9 or 10, I spent the night at a friend's house. I knew his mum was pretty strict, but holy shoot did I find out how much. He did something really minor like leave his socks in the living room and she started shouting at him like he left a turd on the floor or something. Then he pissed her off again that night and she wailed on his ass so hard that it scared me. She was a psycho the way she was spanking and shouting at him. I hated her guts after that night. The dad's mistress came over. Apparently the mother knew of her existence and it had been putting a strain on things. My buddy and I hid in the basement while the wife and mistress were screaming at each other upstairs. Shockingly did not cause a divorce. Found my friend's elder brother's anime body pillow. He had clearly did the dirty with it. Wasn't the night, it was the morning after. I was at a friend's house in the big city when I was maybe 8 or 9. I had gone to the bathroom for an hour and gone out. Nothing strange. Then my friend goes in after me and comes back out. About 10 minutes later his mum goes mental and screams at me. At first I don't understand what it's about, but then she points me to the bathroom where there's a big puddle of piss on the floor. She made me clean up her son's piss, because he'd told her I had done it. Needless to say I didn't really speak to my friend after that. Was an awkward breakfast. I took a bath and when I got out my friend told her mum I had soap in my bag. I never said that until her mum made me get back in the bath and washed my bits for me. So wrong now that I'm an adult and think about it. I saw Peen for the first time. We were watching movies on my friend's TV and fell asleep watching. Must have been on Cinemax or something, because I woke up in the middle of the night. It was a Pino of a man and woman in the shower. That was really awkward since I was 13 and hadn't experienced anything like that. I was too scared to turn it off, because her parents were up in another room and I didn't want them to know I was awake. So I pretended to be asleep. I eventually fell back to sleep, but it took forever. The worst was her parents fighting. They would yell, curse, hit each other, and were always drunk. What's the most fricked up is I stayed there so often that it became sort of normal to me. I didn't like it, but it wasn't something I could stop. I had so many weird and inappropriate conversations with her drunk mother. Conversations about me and my friend's Shrek sleeves or about her problems. The worst was when he shoved her into a metal pole and it bent. I didn't see it happen, but that pole was like a twisted monument to the violence that regularly took place. All the sleepovers there in my teens messed me up more than I thought. If I told my parents the whole truth of how bad it was, I don't think they would have let me sleep over. Girl put a massive ant in her VJ right in front of me like it was nothing. Same girl introduced my sisters and I to the choke yourself out game, where you take several deep breaths, hyperventilate and hold your breath until you pass out. Whoever fakes it had to sleep alone. Needless to say, my mum was pissed when she found us all unconscious in different areas of the bedroom. One of my BFF's dads tried to get me drunk and made a pass at me. I was 15 and staying at my one girlfriend's house. Her dad tried to be cool and buy us wine coolers. So, she and I were up drinking and listening to music in her room. Her dad had to listening right outside of the door, because when I went out into the hallway he popped right up in my face. He started getting way too close and handsy. This was not my first rodeo. I have been dodging my mom's sugar daddy's boyfriend for years. So I saw what was happening and escaped into the bathroom. I pretended to be sick until he left the hallway. I was friends with his daughter until college. I just made sure to never be alone with her dad again. Sad thing is I wasn't her only friend who he tried things with, but we never talked about it until years later. It was a sleepover party for a friend's birthday. We were maybe 7 or 8. I was going to sleep on the floor, with a sleeping bag. No worries. I wake up to her dog walking over me like a blackout drunk, smelling like piss, not responding to anything, but still walking around and bumping into everything. Parents refused to bring the dog to the vet. and the birthday girl acted like it was nothing new. Basically, long story short, I watched a dog slowly succumb to a brain tumor at my friend's birthday sleepover. It was a friend's birthday slumber party, so there were quite a few of us. We were all sitting at the kitchen table and one of the girls vomited, and then in spectacular domino fashion everyone else started to vomit too. It was really bizarre. Saw my friend's parents having Shreks. Parents had no idea me and my friend saw them. Not a sleepover in the traditional sense as we were both in our early 20s, but I once had a friend visiting from interstate and I let him crash at my parents to save him on accommodation costs. Trying to be a good host, I let him sleep in my bed and I slept on the floor. Woke up to the sound of the shoot head wanking in my bed. Who freaking does that? Still pisses me off to this day. I was about 10, stayed over my friend's house. He lived in a sketchy part of Sydney. A whole SBS series was actually released about this area called Struggle Street, and essentially, we stayed up all night, but we could hear shouting and screaming from a few houses down. Curious and scared cause we were 10, we went outside to try and see what was going on. When 2 houses down we saw a woman in like a tank top and tights. She was bruised and was crying, while a man was dragging her by the arm back inside the house. She kept pulling away, so he pushed her. She fell down the 2 steps out front and hit her head on the grass. She didn't get up after that. The ambulance came about an hour later. We still haven't spoken about that night since. Until now, I guess. A friend of mine went to have a sleepover at his friend's house after the friend threw a baby shower. Not only was the friend's pregnant girlfriend drinking and smoking weed, but my friend said that he had to sleep on the floor and noticed things crawling along the floor. They were maggots. He ended up sleeping in his car.